Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mystery and Reason, Lecture 9.3. We will continue with our metaphors for the meaning of life, or metaphors for life, from Solomon and Higgins, chapter 2, and we'll also look at a longer passage from a book by Nietzsche. So, just to remind you, we've got this long list that we're trying to work our way through of the different metaphors for life that Solomon and Higgins come up with. I think we went through the first six, and in this lecture, we're just going to do two more. And then I think I'll do one more lecture where we'll see if we can get through the rest of them, but we'll see about that. Okay. So let's go on an adventure. Life as an adventure. Well, this is a fun one, isn't it? I would say this is a particularly rich metaphor because if you think about a literal adventure, whether it's in real life or a book or a movie, a show, a video game, a tabletop RPG, an adventure is a particularly rich sort of activity. What do I mean by rich? Well, one way to put it is an adventure sort of combines together elements of all of the previous six metaphors. So check it out. There's a cool uh, POV uh, map of the entire story of the Hobbit. So from the Shire, we see all the way to the Lonely Mountain. I love that one. Okay, so an adventure certainly has game elements. It's fun, cooperative, competitive, and so on. It has story elements like a plot, character development, and such. It involves a mission or many missions. There could be an overall goal or several sub goals. It involves tragedy, dangers that are not successfully overcome, perhaps fatally. Let's see, I think I need to fix something. Okay, danger is not successfully avoided or overcome. So, you know, your adventuring companions might not make it. Things can happen. Adventure can involve comedy. So I'm thinking of amusing encounters, surprises, blunders, victory celebrations, and so forth. An adventure involves art, at least insofar as the adventurers need to be creative to solve problems, and they express their characters as they develop and make achievements. Okay, so we're mainly sort of, if you say that we're thinking of, you might say we're thinking of adventures from games, right? Or fantasy fiction. So let's make sure we also apply the metaphor to life. So that's what literal adventures are like, but how is this a metaphor for life? Well, the easy answer is if we've already established that games, stories, missions, comedy, tragedy, and art can be metaphors for life, and if adventures include elements of all of these, then you would think adventure must be a kind of supreme metaphor for life that ties together everything we've been saying. However, Solomon and Higgins also point out some ways in which adventure differs from the other metaphors. So they say this: life can be aesthetic and exciting without being like art, without the necessity of always thinking about the shape of the whole or what it looks like to an observer. So I guess the idea is that adventures are a bit more improvisational. Of course, art can be improvisational, but a lot of art is very intentional. A certain effect is intended, and we do several drafts of it until we get it just right. Whereas an adventure, you don't backtrack. You just keep on going, right? Whatever happens. There's also the thrill of living to the fullest, taking chances, enjoying challenge and the rush of adrenaline. Now, I think that those are some of the game elements I was talking about. Um, but specifically the thrillingness of adventure is more emphatic, I think, than I mean, some games are thrilling, but not all of them, not all the time at least. Taking chances. So you might say a game, we were talking about how it's something you don't want to take too seriously. And if you die in a game, like a video game, of course, nothing happens to you in real life. So games, we think of them as things where we're sort of temporarily playing them, but we can step out of them. Again, I said life as a game wouldn't be like that, but still, that's what we think of when we think of games. Whereas adventures, you might say there's more at stake. You're actually taking risks. Um, you might, if you go the wrong way on your adventure, you might go into a very dangerous situation. So, but yeah, living to the fullest, think about, adrenaline junkies and so forth. That would be the sort of, yes, it's a game, but they're in one sense, but also it's maybe more serious. There's more at risk. Okay. Seeing life as an adventure is like that. It's living by taking risks, even risking life, and thrilling in that sense of skill and uncertainty. Uncertainty is another aspect that comes in here. So, sort of uncertainty can be daunting, it can be anxiety inducing. But if we think of life as an adventure, it's sort of like we revel in the uncertainty. We thrive with this sort of open-ended, let's see what life throws at me next attitude, right? So first of all, we should all, oh, I don't know why I say first of all. I've said lots of things already, but one thing we should acknowledge is that adventures aren't for everyone, right? Some people like their lives to be peaceful, safe, routine, and mostly uneventful. For adventurers, that stuff is boring. But some people find boring, things that adventurers would find boring, the other people find comforting, right? And that's totally fine. So this metaphor might not be as accessible to everybody as some of the other ones. In The Hobbit, since I already mentioned that, when Gandalf tries to persuade Bilbo Baggins to go on an adventure as a burglar, Bilbo famously protests, "We are plain quiet folk and have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner." So Bilbo at the beginning of the story is living a peaceful, safe, routine, and mostly uneventful life as a hobbit in the Shire. But he does end up going. And once he gets a taste for adventure, he spends the rest of his life dreaming about going on another. And he does, I think, he eventually goes to Rivendell to live with the elves, and then he makes his way to the Grey Havens and sails to the Undying Land. So he does get to go on some other adventures, but it's hard to say. Here's a question: would it have been better or worse had he stayed at home? Less interesting, at least, but again, that's sort of from the perspective of somebody who likes interesting adventures, and from the perspective of somebody who likes comfort and peace. Maybe, staying at home would have been better. So it's hard to say. There's sort of competing metaphors here. Um, I guess we don't have a name for the other one. It's not, maybe not on the list. Life as peace, life as comfort. Um, I'm not sure. What life as routine, that's more dull, right? But peacefulness, comfort, safety, maybe those are values that compete with the adventuring, uncertainty, risking, open-endedness values. Okay, well, let's switch to another one. So, life as disease. And as I'm reading this, I'm feeling the need to cough because I am getting over a sickness right now. Hold on. Appropriate. Okay. So I've got some quotes for you on this one. This one might not be so obvious, at least it wasn't to me. I don't typically think of life as disease, but here's a quote from the philosopher Hegel. He cryptically stated in his book, The Science of Logic, which is one of the most intense and difficult works of philosophy ever written. But anyway, he says, the nature of finite things is to have the seed of passing away as their essential being. The hour of their birth is the hour of their death. Okay, so in some sense, he's not speaking literally. Things don't die, things don't always die an hour after they're born, right? So what does he mean here? Well, we might get a better idea of it from this quotation I found that's attributed to the Buddha, but I'm not sure if it's actually from a Buddhist text. Um, so apparently he said, and this is the original Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. I mentioned another Buddhist figure, Budai, the laughing Buddha, in the last lecture, not the same person. Anyway, apparently Siddhartha said, we begin to die from the moment we are born, for birth is the cause of death. The nature of decay is inherent in youth. The nature of sickness is inherent in health. In the midst of life, we are verily in death. So that gives you a little bit more to chew on. But I think he's saying this a very similar thing to Hegel, that as soon as we're born, we're already in a process of dying, right? So living, the process of living is the process of dying. They're like one and the same trajectory. Here's a quote from Freud. So, first of all, Solomon and Higgins have a very short quote from Sigmund Freud saying the goal of all life is death. But I think that's either not the best translation or at the very least taken out of context. I found a longer quotation that I think gives us a better idea of Freud's view on death. He wrote, to anyone who listened to us, we were of course prepared to maintain that death was the necessary outcome of life, that everyone owes nature a death and must expect to pay the debt. In short, that death was natural, undeniable, and unavoidable. In reality, however, we were accustomed to behave as if it were otherwise. We showed an unmistakable tendency to put death on one side, to eliminate it from life. We tried to hush it up. And he was writing this right after World War One, which was a sort of shockingly violent episode in human history, where suddenly the full, um, you know, violence of modern technological warfare suddenly erupted on the world stage, and it seemed like the absolute collapse of civilization in many ways. So he's writing in that context. But the idea that I love this quote that everyone owes nature a death. It's like our entire life is like um, we're we're in debt. We're in debt to nature, to the world for our life, and we've got to repay the debt at some point, right? Yeah, it's a common way of thinking about death, but I like that way of putting it. Okay. But what about disease? We've been talking about life and death. Well, the relationship between life and death that is expressed in these quotations can maybe be captured by thinking of life as a state of disease or decay that leads inevitably to death. As with the other metaphors, we should note the disanalogy here as well as the analogy. So, literal diseases are things that happen within life, and they are contrasted with periods of relative health. And as long as one's disease is not terminal, one can recover and return to health. So, we must be thinking of life as not just a literal disease, but as a metaphorical one, as the ultimate disease. This is either something from which there is no recovery and we just have to deal with it and cope with it, or maybe life is something from which we can only recover by escaping from life itself, either by going to an afterlife, a heaven, or maybe achieving nirvana, escape from the cycle of reincarnation. Solomon and Higgins also note that the disease metaphor has been applied to modern society, so they don't go. I wish they gave more detail about this. I'm not sure which books they're referring to, but they say in the early 1980s, a large number of books were published describing the disease of modern life, of Western civilization, of capitalism, and so on. And we might even see humanity as a whole as some kind of disease. So are we moving from the individual level to the species level here? So in the movie The Matrix, I've got the disease. Hold on. Agent Smith famously says to Morpheus, I believe, I realize that you're not talking about human beings. You're not actually mammals. Every mammal on this planet instinctively develops a natural equilibrium with the surrounding environment, but you humans do not. You move to an area and you multiply until every natural resource is consumed. The only way you can survive is to spread to another area. There's another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern. Do you know what it is? A virus. Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. And I don't need to tell you why that might be an appropriate metaphor given the environmental impacts that modern human life has had. So let's finish this short lecture on a more positive note. So continuing with the under the heading of life as a disease, let's try to also get away from that. So literal diseases, let's go back to those. If and when we recover from them, so of course there are terminal diseases, but let's think about recovering from, say, a virus or, a horrible injury, surgeries and whatnot. So if and when we recover, this experience of recovery can itself be the spur for a new appreciation of the meaningfulness and importance of life and health. So, one of my favorite passages in all of philosophy, even though it's not one of my favorite philosophers, Friedrich Nietzsche, he's not bad, he's just not one of my favorites. But consider the opening passage of the preface to the second edition of his book, The Gay Science, also translated The Joyous Science. And I think you'll see why I like this passage so much. He writes, this book may need more than one preface, and in the end, there would still remain room for doubt whether anyone who had never lived through similar experiences could be brought closer to the experience of this book by means of prefaces. Okay, he's saying that while he's writing a preface. It seems to be written in the language of he's talking about his book that he's introducing. The book seems to be written in the language of the wind that thaws ice and snow. High spirits, unrest, contradiction, and April weather are present in it, and one is instantly reminded no less of the proximity of winter than of the triumph over the winter that is coming, must come, and perhaps has already come. Gratitude pours forth continually. So just before I read this, just imagine you've been like deathly ill and bedridden for a week, and suddenly you wake up and you can tell that the sickness is leaving your body. And just think about the relief and maybe gratitude that that experience contains. Gratitude pours forth continually, as if the unexpected had just happened. The gratitude of a convalescent, for convalescence was unexpected. So convalescence means recovering from a disease. Gay Science, the title of his book, that signifies the Saturnalia. That's the name of a pagan festival that actually Christmas is loosely based on, I believe, celebrating the Roman god Saturn. Gay Science signifies the Saturnalia of a spirit who has patiently resisted a terrible long pressure, patiently, severely, coldly, without submitting, but also without hope, and who is now all at once attacked by hope. Attacked by hope. What a great phrase there. The hope for health and the intoxication of convalescence. Is it any wonder that in the process, much that is unreasonable and foolish comes to light? Much playful tenderness that is lavished even on problems that have a prickly hide and are not made to be caressed and enticed? He continues. This whole book is nothing but a bit of merrymaking after long privation and powerlessness, the rejoicing of strength that is returning, of a reawakened faith in a tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, of a sudden sense and anticipation of a future, of impending adventures, of seas that are open again, of goals that are permitted again, believed again. And what did not lie behind me then, this stretch of desert, exhaustion, disbelief, icing up in the midst of youth, this interlude of old age at the wrong time, this tyranny of pain, even excelled by the tyranny of pride that refused the conclusions of pain, and conclusions are consolations. This radical retreat into solitude as a self-defense against a contempt for men that had become pathologically clairvoyant, this determined self-limitation to what was bitter, harsh, and hurtful to know, prescribed by the nausea that had gradually developed out of an incautious and pampering spiritual diet called romanticism. Oh, who could re-experience all of this? So there he's going back and describing the period of illness that preceded his convalescence, and he was literally ill with various, I think, diseases during his life. I know he ended up dying of syphilis, as far as I know, and sort of lost his mind towards the end of his life as well. Okay. So, just a brief comment on this beautiful passage. So, recovery from disease has the potential to give us faith in the future, to make us optimistic, right? Give us faith in life as possibility, as adventure, as a world rich with meaning that we can hope to experience. And even if we aren't literally ill or literally healthy, we can, I think, take inspiration from this outlook. We can try to look at the world and our lives and our future as if we're emerging from some form of sickness, darkness. Um, it's a optimistic outlook, and I thought I would leave you with that for this lecture. And next time we will turn to some of the connections between these metaphors and Buddhism, since there's several that correlate with Buddhist ideas. So that will be in the next one. All right, I'll see you then.